Is paid programming. Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd, certified financial planner practitioner and founder of Asset Management Resources, LLC, a registered investment advisor firm. We call it Something More because we like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients across the country, your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us. I'm Chris Boyd. I'm here with Jeff Perry as my co-host again, and our guest is Paul Nedzwicki of the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce. And we're sitting right next to each other because we're having studio problems today. But Paul, thanks for being here. Great to see you.
Great to be here, Chris. Great to see you, Jeff.
Good to see you, Paul.
There's always so much to talk about with you as a guest. So let's jump right in. We're going to talk about the bridges to start off with and see if we can get into housing as well. So tell us a little bit about this effort. It seems like last I heard, federal funding to actually get these projects moving didn't seem to happen the way we'd hoped. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, the first application that we put in last year was unsuccessful, although the application scored well on need. Mm-hmm. The state didn't really identify the match, enough of a match to be competitive in the first round, but we're talking about 5 years of funding that will come from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that they passed 2 years ago. So there'll be an opportunity to reapply each year. And
so do you think it's likely we'll get some?
I think it's looking better this year for federal funding. The governor just submitted her application 2 weeks ago, and so she's requesting almost $1.4 billion from those three sources within the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. So $1 billion comes out of just this bridge improvement program, and on top of that, there's a state match of $350 million. And an additional $350 million that's in a Senate appropriations bill right now. And if that doesn't come to pass, the state is going to put in an additional $350 that they're actually saving for the Bourne Bridge. Because the big difference in this application versus last year's application, this year's application is just for one bridge. So they're going to go for the Sagamore first.
Really? Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Why did they choose to do that?
I think they looked at the four major awards under the Bridge Improvement Program last year, and they looked at how much each of those projects got. And so the project that was most highly funded was a project that for a bridge that connects Kentucky and Ohio for $1.6 billion, and it happens to be in Mitch McConnell's district. So
total coincidence.
That was a good gauge for a max ask.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So what do you think the full price tag of the desired projects, both bridges totally redone, what is the price tag of that whole project?
Yeah, the Federal Highway Administration was in over the summer to work with Mass DOT and the Army Corps of Engineers on a number, and the number that they came up with is $4.5 billion for both.
Wow! So it's not likely to come as starting out. Now you can't build half a bridge with $1 billion.
You can't build a half bridge. We're talking about structures where the construction began on both these bridges in 1932. So they are quickly approaching 100 years old.
Yes.
Infrastructure there functionally obsolete. The approaches on either side of each bridge can handle more traffic than the bridges themselves. So they're quite literally a bottleneck.
Yeah.
And they need to be replaced. So the governor has submitted a comprehensive application for Sagamore. I think that will be competitive. There's a lot of support from the federal delegation as well as the state delegation. We'll wait and see. It'll probably be late spring or summer before we get an answer back on that. But there is some concern from the chamber's perspective with the sort of one bridge strategy. Although the state remains committed to replacing both, looking for funding for one creates an issue with the Bourne Bridge potentially. If we look back at a 2020 report by the Army Corps of Engineers, they said at the time that they may be looking at a major rehabilitation of the Bourne Bridge within 5 years if that project wasn't funded. A major rehabilitation project would be 3.5 years long and would require a complete closure of the bridge for a 6 to 12 month period. And anyone who has been dealing with the maintenance work on the existing bridges this spring and another maintenance project on the Bourne in a couple of weeks, knows we just won't be able to survive a complete closure of one bridge for 6 to 12 months. I mean, it will leave an economic scar on communities like Falmouth and Bourne that will take more than a generation to recover from. So we really need to sort of keep our foot on the gas and figure out funding for the Bourne Bridge as soon as possible.
Yikes. Seems like we got a lot to deal with here. And now, wasn't there just a major, is this the legislation you're talking about? Wasn't there just a major infrastructure legislation passed? Or is that different from the one you're talking about?
That is the major bipartisan infrastructure act that was passed 2 years ago. So there's, over $1 trillion for projects available around the country, but there's so much demand.
And there's so many needs.
There are so many needs.
So what's your expectation? What's going to happen?
I don't have a crystal ball, but I think we'll be competitive for Sagamore, but we have to look at the Bourne Bridge too. I mean, Mass DOT has been good at looking, they've selected the type of bridge, which is an arch bridge, which is similar in design to the ones that we have now. Those can actually be built off site, floated up the canal and raised. So actually the construction of the new bridges will be less disruptive to traffic than the maintenance from the existing.
Right? Yes, that's so interesting.
Yeah, very much so. And they've chosen the crossings. They're inboard to the existing bridges, and they've got designs for how to redesign the approaches for the new bridges. So we've made that much progress. We're also in the environmental review process, and there is a small amount of federal funding now attached to the project. So I think we're in good shape, but there's still this big question mark about where the rest of the funding is going to come for the Bourne Bridge.
Paul, once the funding is in place for one or both, is there a projected time frame to build a new bridge or bridge?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Jeff. And so the governor's application that went in projected, if we're successful in calendar year 24, we find out that the construction could begin, the earliest would be late 2026 or early 2027 with a 2032 completion date, 2032 to 2036. So it's potentially a 7 to 10 year build.
Sure.
So, there's the chamber obviously has some great concern around that too, just the optics of that, and our economy is so heavily reliant on tourism and travel and the 5.5 million people that visit every summer. And we don't want them to choose to go someplace else because there's some concern around the construction of the bridge.
And so that brings back to the issue of the Bourne Bridge rehabilitation and maintenance. It seems like it's going to be practically impossible to avoid that.
And the Army Corps has said if there were a plan in place, and they had a fixed start date for construction, that they might be able to delay some of the major rehab. But there's also a question that major rehab, the cost of that is over $100 million. So, if there were federal money available through the Army Corps of Engineers for that project, that's $100 million that's not going to replace a bridge. Once there's been that much of an investment, we're likely to hang on to that bridge for another generation, which is still a functionally obsolete bridge. And then if the Army Corps doesn't have that money, which is likely, we could be looking at permanent lane restrictions or even weight restrictions on the Bourne Bridge. So the worst case scenario would be we get a new Sagamore Bridge, but in 10 to 15 years, we actually have less capacity than we do now. This is a real issue for us. That's why we're very happy with the application that's been filed. We hope that it is funded, but this is not the end of the battle over funding the replacement of these bridges at all.
Yeah, I can see why you're concerned about moving forward with the one bridge. You might end up with one bridge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
What's the chamber's call to action? What's what's your message to our listeners, the community? What should we be doing? Is there anything we can be doing to be helping in this effort?
Well, I think we have to, it's all about awareness and education. And I think you'll hear a lot of people that will celebrate the application that's gone in for the Sagamore, certainly celebrate an award if it's made next year, but that's not the whole story. So, I think what the listeners have to do is to keep, our elected officials engaged on finding that funding for the second bridge. I think we have to be realistic about whether we can expect another $1 billion for the second bridge from the federal government anytime in the future if we're successful this round. And clearly $1 billion for that second bridge is the Commonwealth would not be able to sort of incorporate that into their existing bond cap structure. Mm-hmm. So either a statewide bridge program that creates additional bond capacity like they did a decade or so ago, or some other alternative funding mechanism for the bridges is what we're going to have to consider.
Well, this is one of the major issues facing our community, and one of them that creates more traffic on that bridge is the issue of housing, workforce housing. Maybe we can transition to talking about that for a minute or two.
And they are related in many ways. You know, the housing issue on the Cape, especially from the point of view of businesses on the Cape and employers, the biggest issue we face is labor supply. And we've seen a huge churn in the real estate market through the COVID-19 pandemic years. And so what was the median price of a single family home on the Cape in 2018 was $380,000. It's over 700,000 now.
Wow.
You know, so, and a lot of the homes that were sold, a good amount of that stock were used for year-round rentals, and a lot of those year-round renters who were part of the workforce have been displaced.
Mm-hmm. Just had an inquiry from, I'm involved in my college regional club. I'm president of the Holy Cross Club on Cape Cod. And one of the people who just moved to the Cape got a job at the hospital. Oh, by the way, can you or any of your board members have any suggestions how I can find a rental property, year-round rental property?
Yeah, this has been a historic issue for us. Obviously, we have a seasonal economy, so the amount of money that a property owner can make renting seasonally is generally more than they would make renting year-round, which has led to this sort of dearth of quality year-round rental space on the Cape. So we have to get engaged on that. But we also have a housing typology problem. 86% of the housing stock on the Cape are single-family homes, compared to a 56% state average. So we need to find
Say those numbers again.
86%.
Wow.
Are single-family homes. So we have this monoculture of single-family homes, and 82% of the land on the Cape is either developed or protected. So we don't have a lot of room to grow out, to spread out. So we've got to look.
What's the solution?
The solution is appropriate density. In areas that can accommodate and have the infrastructure to do that. But 37% of the housing stock are second homes. And the other thing that we've seen through the pandemic and with the advent of Airbnb and VRBO is we've always been a second homeowner community, but now a lot of those second homes are being used as short-term rentals. So the Cape has almost 18,000 short-term rentals right now.
Wow.
So this is the issue with the seasonal economy.
I mean, there's a market element to it.
Right.
People want to be able to maximize their opportunity and understandably so.
Yes.
And yet we gotta have people to be here to work, not everyone's going to want to make that commute, especially if we have troubles with, construction on our bridges or something where it makes it even harder.
Absolutely. So, if we look currently, a third of the people that live on the Cape that were born here, that are over the age of 18, are currently living with family members.
Wow.
And if you look at just sort of 47% of the jobs on Cape Cod are done by people who don't live on Cape Cod. And almost 30% of the workforce crosses those bridges every day.
Wow.
So, and that's making
I remember a year or so ago, we had Elisa with Housing Assistance Corporation in here talking about an initiative to get, homeowners the opportunity to have like an apartment and, that they could rent out and things like that. I forget what that was called. There was a name for it.
An accessory dwelling unit.
Thank you. How's that? Is that making a difference? Is there? Can we do more of those kinds of things? That was a creative. Seemed to me like creative option, some funding to help people to be, if they wanted to try to make that available.
Yeah, no, and that's still. I think there are 9 towns now that have adopted ADU bylaws, and so we are seeing. There's been a couple hundred, I think, units produced over the last several years. So that's one option. but those are very small incremental.
It's not going to have a
advances.
huge impact.
Yeah, long term, I think that is a good thing. I think especially on the outer Cape, you have some people that will rent their homes, and they'll move into Nickerson State Park for a few weeks during the summer.
Right.
So if we could create the ADU space so that maybe the homeowner moves into a smaller unit and they can rent the larger house, that's generating wealth in our communities, and that's better for economic development long term.
Do we need large scale apartment complex to get more creation of those kinds of resources?
We do. If you look at around the state where communities have been successful in adding really workforce housing, it's the transit oriented development around some of the MBTA spurs. And so there have been a lot of advances made in how these apartment buildings look and how they work. And I think we're going to have to make some space for those kind of opportunities on the Cape. They're not going to be everywhere, and they shouldn't be, but there are discrete locations where we could create enough density that we would make a difference.
So now, obviously, every homeowner is thinking, I don't want that next to me,
right.
That kind of thing. But are there, industrial parks or places that we could be thinking in terms of?
Yeah, the industrial parks are one of them. Industrial zoning is generally the most liberal kind of zoning in every town. So if you look in the town of Barnstable, for example, you've got the Everlay project and you've got a New England development project, a couple hundred units each that are going in. They're sewered and they're not encroaching on existing neighborhoods. So
is it cost effective for builders to maybe have an interest in that kind of a project?
I think that, if you look at the rents that they can generate on the Cape now as compared to what they could generate 10 to 15 years ago, they are.
So why aren't we seeing that kind of thing, or are we? Is that happening?
You're starting to see it in Barnstable, and Barnstable just changed their zoning on Main Street also to this sort of kind of a form-based zoning. They've got a couple hundred units of interested developers that are interested in building on Main Street, another place that's sewered and where a certain level of density would be appropriate. So there is some hope out there in discrete areas that we can build more of what we need.
But if it's 40, would you say 40 some odd % of our workforce is
47
doesn't live here?
Doesn't live here. Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
It is. And that's up from about 35% 5 years ago. So a lot of that is the remote workforce now, post-COVID, but still.
So they might be working here, but their job is somewhere else. It's not there because they're providing services here.
No,
as an example.
If you have to look, if you make up to $80,000 as a family on the Cape, you could qualify for subsidized housing on some level if you could find it. But you need to make $210,000 annually in order to get into the market. So between 80 and 210,000 are most people.
Right.
And firefighters, school teachers, police officers, healthcare workers, nurses. That just can't get into the market.
It's amazing.
Paul, are you seeing employers take their own action? The market's trying to deal with this, and you mentioned some efforts of government. Are you seeing individual employers take specific action to buy properties, develop their own workforce?
Yes. Yeah, especially on the hospitality side. Some of the larger hotels, for example, have purchased some of the outmoded motels in proximity and just turn those into workforce housing. You've also seen Cape Cod Healthcare has made some investment in housing also so that they can recruit the people that we need.
Well, that makes sense. They have responsibility here as well.
Right.
These are pretty amazing issues we need to be thinking about. And seems like, I don't know, seems like alarm bells are going off, Paul, and getting nervous. We've been talking about it for years. It's not like it's new.
Right.
But it seems like, you're seeing the problems that people have been talking about with the workforce, bubbling up and the lack of housing there. The bridges have been talked about for a long time. Now we've got this kind of plan of, let's rebuild, start new, which again, it's been talked about for a few years now, but seems pretty exciting, like a great option, but still seems like it's a long way off.
Yeah. And part of it is the two bridges are federal assets that really should have been replaced 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we kind of know that we've known that the bridges have been a problem. We also know that housing's been a problem. We have over 400 miles of coastline. And so the real estate value on the Cape is higher than state average, but because it's a seasonal economy, the average wages are lower. So we've always had this affordability issue, but COVID-19 made these problems that we could see 10 years out on, before they would be at a critical point, and within 6 months they became critical. So it's here now and a lot faster than we anticipated, and it's going to be more difficult to find our way out because of that.
Well, I don't know. I like to leave things on a happy note. I'm a little nervous. I'm a little discouraged. Give us a little bit of enthusiasm.
We're going to get there. The Chamber is partnered with Housing Assistance Corporation, the Cape and Islands Association of Realtors, in this Housing to Protect Cape Cod coalition. We had our first summit last November with over 400 people. We're having our next one's coming up on October 26th, I believe. So there is some momentum. I think we're seeing some of the towns that are starting to change zoning in appropriate areas to accommodate some of the new development that we need on the housing side. The ADU issue at the Chamber, we brought on sort of a J1 housing coordinator to host some of our J1 students that come here and are a tremendous part of supporting the seasonal economy. And we see a really complete application for at least one bridge. And I think there are other ways to figure out how to fund the Bourne. So these are difficult discussions to have, but it's not like these problems don't have solutions. So I think that's the most positive thing we can say.
Excellent. Paul,
Good job there, Paul. You make Chris feel better.
Yeah, exactly. I feel a little bit better. Hopefully everyone else does too. But keep up the good work. Thank you for all you're doing. It's important, and it's not always top of mind for all of our daily lives, but it's very important.
It is.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's financial planning, portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at amrfinancial.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901 or send us your questions to radio@amrfinancial.com.
You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd, Financial Talk Show.
Asset Management Resources LLC and J. Christopher Boyd, CFP, provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is in the nature of general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. AMR LLC cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.